What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I have seen a lot of comments on various videos, specifically those dealing with Doctor Doom, who were asking the question, when and how did Doctor Doom become the Sorcerer Supreme to basically replace Doctor Strange and Marvel? And how does that tie into one world under Doom? Well, the short answer to this question is that it actually happened at the end of a story called Blood Hunt, the most recent story that Marvel had launched. But what I think would be really interesting here to kind of add some meat and potatoes to this answer is to actually discuss more or less the instances where Doctor Doom had actually won in Marvel Comics. And for all the bluster of Doom's character and all the attempts to seize control of everything, Doctor Doom's actually succeeded 3 times. One of those times is really more inferred than anything else. And that's kind of where we start, is with Secret Wars 1984. Now, of course, we've covered this story. Most people have heard of this story, and I'm sure a good portion of you guys have read this story, or at least seen mine or other YouTubers' videos on the story. But the general gist behind Secret Wars, the original, is that we were introduced to the character of the Beyonder. And while he was incredibly enigmatic, we knew he was astronomically powerful. So much so that he had kind of Frankensteined together this place called Battleworld using pieces of various locales from across the universe. In fact, that's actually how Marvel introduced Julia Carpenter, is because he pulled a piece of Denver, Colorado to Battleworld itself. But the whole goal of the Beyonder was to just kind of see what superheroes and supervillains were about. So the most popular heroes and the most popular villains were thrown together on this hodgepodge world called Battleworld, and then they were told by the Beyonder, fight to the death, and whoever the last man standing is, I will grant their heart's desire. Doctor Doom, during that story, had not only stolen the powers of Galactus, but had in turn gone on to steal the powers of the Beyonder. Now again, the reason why this is inferred more than anything else is because given the vast amount of power he had at his disposal, and despite the fact that the Beyonder's full capabilities had not necessarily been fleshed out at that point in time, because he was able to essentially capture and force guys like Galactus into battling and literally overwhelmed Galactus with his power, it was largely believed that he was powerful on a universal level. Now, the reality is that Secret Wars 2 from 1985-86, that basically confirmed what a lot of fans had already suspected. But what matters is that Doctor Doom had essentially seized control of Battleworld and not much else. He didn't really take over the entirety of the universe. He didn't rewrite history or anything along those lines. And in fact, Doctor Doom's defeat came with a combination of trickery and just outright overwhelming force. The Beyonder eventually took his powers back, and then Battleworld was essentially ended. The story came to a close. All the superheroes went home. Now again, that story with the Beyonder follows in Secret Wars 2 when the Beyonder goes to Earth and then dresses as John Travolta from Saturday Night Fever. Not even lying. But for the character of Doom, again, because he didn't really conquer everything, most fans don't necessarily consider this to be an instance where Doom won. It's really more of a reference to just how powerful Doom has become in Marvel Comics and the various things he's done to attain that power. And that brings me into something that I do think is an important talking point for his character. For the longest time in Marvel, we didn't necessarily know why Doctor Doom did what he did. And for those of you guys who have been on the channel for a while, you already know this, so bear with me for a second. But the idea here was that up until Triumph and Torment, it largely just seemed like Doctor Doom did the stuff he did because he was a dick. But then Triumph and Torment, coupled with his origin story, basically revealed to us as the fan base that Doctor Doom's mother had sold her soul to the devil, or really to Mephisto, and that his schemes in trying to take over the world or amass huge levels of power was really done more for the purpose of trying to free his mother's soul. Now, it doesn't reconcile one-to-one, which is to say, not every scheme of Doctor Doom goes towards this particular point. The story of Emperor Doom is a perfect example of that, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But following his mother's soul being freed, Doctor Doom just trying to take over the world and rule everything was due less to trying to save his mother and due more to like his ego, right? Just trying to demonstrate to the world that he really is the most capable person to rule over everything, right? Extreme levels of arrogance, essentially. But again, that takes us into Emperor Doom. And Emperor Doom is the first real time in Marvel Comics where Doctor Doom actually wins. Now, his machinations are confined to Earth. It doesn't really expand beyond Earth at all. But during this story, what Doctor Doom had done is he had seized control of the Purple Man, Zebediah Killgrave. Now, Killgrave, as most of you guys know, if only because of the Jessica Jones show, is a guy who has the ability to emit pheromones that can bend people to his will. It is possible to overcome that if you are a sufficient telepath, or if you're someone with an indomitable will, somebody who has so much willpower that you can literally overcome his influence. It takes work. It's incredibly difficult to do. And I believe Luke Cage did it during Brian Michael Bendis's breakout storyline when the raft was blown open and Purple Man basically escaped. But unlike Jessica Jones, Purple Man actually got his powers in the comics in Daredevil #4 when he was basically splashed with a kind of nerve agent that basically gave him the ability to emit these pheromones. But the long and short of this is that Doctor Doom had figured out a way to not only enslave Purple Man, essentially, but to actually amplify his powers. And the powers spread across the world. And so Doctor Doom seized control of everything. Now, his defeat actually came by way of Simon Williams, simply because of the fact that before Doom had made his move, Simon Williams was undergoing an experiment with Iron Man's help to basically understand the ionized radiation that made up his body, to essentially learn how his new powers worked. And so because he was in this tank when everything popped off, he was literally protected from the influence of the Purple Man. And so with the help of Simon Williams, Captain America has woken up to everything that's going on, and essentially the superheroes start marshaling forces. What made Emperor Doom a very different story from a lot of what else had happened in Marvel Comics with regarding Doom's character is that the ending of the story was a very deep philosophical question. The question being, is the world actually better off? The reason for that was because when Doom had seized control of everything, despite the fact that everyone lost their free will, the world was an incredibly peaceful place. There was no war, none of that stuff. And so I think it's Hawkeye that asked the question of Captain America, sure, right, we freed the world from the influence of Doom, but now the world's going back to the way it was before. And if anything, countries are more distrusting of each other than they were before Doom made his move. So I don't really know if we actually did the world any favors. Of course, Captain America's response is, blarg, freedom, yada, 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 and that kind of thing. But what matters is that it really sort of brought into sharp relief the idea that maybe the world would be better under Doctor Doom. And so one of the things that this story did, in addition to Secret Wars 1984, is it introduced to us, the fan base, this idea that Doctor Doom constantly learns from both his defeats as well as his victories. Even if his victories are short-lived, or even if they are basically victories that are almost guaranteed to be unending, as an example with Secret Wars 2015, that while he is ultimately taken out by the superheroes, he takes everything he learned from his experience and builds onto that. And that actually takes us into Secret Wars 2015. This was really more of an extraordinary circumstance that Doctor Doom had both caused and been thrust into at the same time. And in the absence of anybody else being capable of doing anything, Doctor Doom was essentially the one to save everything. And so to kind of condense this entire huge, 5-year story down into maybe a couple minutes, the overall gist is that Secret Wars kicks off with the incursions, Earths crashing into each other. And while no one really knew exactly how it all started, towards the end of Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers run, you basically end up learning that while the Molecule Man Owen Reese is an incredibly powerful character, every universe has its own version of the Molecule Man, and every origin is the same. The reason being because the Beyonders had created the Molecule Man and then put one of him in every single universe. And this grand cosmic experiment that they were undertaking would come to its conclusion when every Molecule Man across the multiverse would be detonated. And it would literally blow their universes up and in turn destroy the multiverse. And the Beyonders did this because they just wanted to see what would happen. At least that was the explanation that was given to us during Hickman's run. That has changed in more recent years, but that's outside the scope of this conversation. What is important here is that when this information was given to Doctor Doom by the Molecule Man, that Doctor Doom and Owen Reese had traveled to another reality and killed the Molecule Man in that universe. When that happened, it destroyed that universe and it left a kind of vacant hole. Now, in years past, I always kind of explained it as an outward push, but really it's more of like an inward pull. That what had essentially happened is that with this universe just seemingly exploding and disappearing, those universes that were next to it were caught in each other's gravitational pull. So they were pulled towards each other, and the universes next to them were pulled to the universes next to them, and so on and so forth. But what this did is it just led to the universes crashing into each other, right? That's how the incursions kicked off. And so by the time you get to the very end of the run, basically it's Doctor Doom realizing there is no stopping the plan of the Beyonders without destroying the Beyonders themselves. It's the only way that it could be done. Just because the Beyonders had entered into the universe after Doctor Doom had gone through and started killing various, Molecule Men, and they realized something was wrong. In their tour across the multiverse, they quite literally killed every cosmic entity they came across in every universe they were in, to the point that they faced off against the Living Tribunal, and 3 Beyonders were enough to destroy the Tribunal. And so it was kind of this realization, the Beyonders gotta go. And so what Doctor Doom did is he gathered what was left of the various Molecule Men across the multiverse, and then traveled to this kind of universal fissure, right? This rip in space in some far off universe, which is what the Beyonders were using to enter into the multiverse. When the Beyonders confronted Doctor Doom, he literally opened the box. All these Molecule Men came pouring out, and like being besieged with, hundreds of thousands of bombs all detonating at the same time, it successfully destroyed the Beyonders, but it eradicated what was left of the multiverse. And so in that moment, Doctor Doom, using Molecule Man as a kind of vector, absorbed the powers of the Beyonders and then started snatching up what he could across the multiverse and then Frankensteining it into Battleworld, right? The new Battleworld from Secret Wars 2015. Now, during that time, Doctor Doom ruled everything. And while it wasn't necessarily the multiverse in the traditional sense, which is to say an infinite number of universes stretching on into oblivion, that it was multiple universes coexisting on a singular world. And so it more or less was a multiverse. And Doctor Doom ruled it with an iron fist. His power was way beyond anybody. And even an Infinity Gauntlet, while it could rival him, was not enough to completely overpower him. And so what ends up happening is that when the final incursion was taking place, leading into Secret Wars 2015, that Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, along with a few superheroes, had stowed away on a life raft, but so had Thanos and the Maker and a few other villains from Marvel Comics. These life rafts basically landed on Battleworld. For the superheroes and the villains within these rafts, no time had passed at all. It had been moments, right? But for everybody on Battleworld, things had always been that way because Doctor Doom had modified their minds to basically make them believe this is the way things had always been. And so the superheroes start rallying together all the various heroes that exist across Battleworld, start telling them the truth of what's going on, and the villains ally with the villains. And so, of course, the villains are defeated, and then the superheroes take the fight directly to Doctor Doom. Ultimately, Doctor Doom is defeated, not really by overwhelming force from the heroes who storm Castle Doomstat and they drag him out and, just do all kinds of crazy stuff to him. Instead, it was Doctor Doom admitting in front of the Molecule Man that Reed Richards would have been able to do a better job in saving the multiverse than Doctor Doom had done. And so Owen Reese took the powers away from Doom, gave him to Reed, and Reed went to work in fixing everything and restoring the multiverse to the way that it was before the incursions started. One of the other things that people tend to forget is that at the end of Secret Wars, while Black Panther had been the person wielding the Infinity Gauntlet and facing off against Doom, what Black Panther had done when everything was basically collapsing is he had taken the Time Stone and jumped back to before the incursions happened. So because it was all effectively undone, he remembered everything, but none of the incursions had happened. So again, it's kind of finicky and wild and really meta commentary, but that was the instance where Doom essentially won. Now, what followed that were, a few stories where Doom had kind of changed his game a little bit, right? He became infamous Iron Man after Civil War II when Tony Stark had basically died. Doom picked up the mantle, and it was really more an attempt at his character to kind of become a good guy and atone for his past misdeeds. But in the here and now, right, regarding the events of Blood Hunt, that story centered around the superhero Blade being possessed by this kind of vampiric entity deity named Varney, who was incredibly powerful and was the first real vampire in existence in Marvel. And what Varney had done while possessing Blade was essentially set things up so there would be an endless night on Earth, and vampires would be able to walk the Earth freely without worrying about being killed by the sun. The superheroes all kind of rallied together, but there wasn't a whole lot that they could do. What Doctor Strange ended up doing was traveling to Latveria and striking a bargain with Doctor Doom, that in exchange for Doom's help in ending the endless night that was happening on Earth, Doctor Strange would make Doctor Doom the new Sorcerer Supreme. The agreement being that once the world had been saved, Doom would give those powers back. What ends up happening is that while Doom is able to undo the endless night, but the additional caveat is that vampires can actually walk freely during the day now, that what ends up happening is Doom refuses to return the powers to Strange, basically saying that he hasn't saved the world yet, and now it's his time to do so. And that's where One World Under Doom kicks off. But this is where Doom is kind of learning from all of his past mistakes. While we are only 2 issues in, and we actually covered the second issue yesterday, that as you guys can tell from the videos that we've done, if you've seen them, that Doctor Doom is not forcing the world to bend to his will. Instead, what Doctor Doom is doing is looking around at the state of the world and then essentially fixing all the world's problems. And so he's sort of doing the inverse of what you would expect from a traditional dictator. Instead of seizing power by force, he's actually giving people a reason to want to keep him there. And that's why in issue number 2, the Fantastic Four weren't really able to find any evidence of nefarious activity. While Doctor Doom is opening schools and stuff like that around the world, he's not indoctrinating people, right? He's not indoctrinating children in order to get to the parents or anything like that. He really is making the world a better place. And that's what makes the story so interesting, but also fills fans with a bit of trepidation. The reason being because if there is no underlying theme for Doctor Doom being a villain here, and he really is making the world better, then how does it all get undone, right? Does it get undone with some kind of hand-wavy conclusion that Marvel just kind of throws out there because they don't really know how to end it? Is it the new status quo going forward forever, that Doctor Doom will return to Latveria, but ultimately the world still exists under his control? No one really knows exactly how it's going to end. I mean, I can almost guarantee he will not stay in control of the world forever. It may very well end up ending like Emperor Doom, where Doctor Doom realizes he's not the best guy to run everything, and then just walks away, right? And that's it. A lot of fans are hoping that's not the case. 1, because that dance has been done before, and 2, it would be a very anticlimactic ending to what has been, up to this point, one of the most phenomenal Doom stories in the history of Marvel Comics. So hopefully that answers your question, kind of gets you guys caught up on everything that's going on with Doctor Doom in Marvel Comics. Let me know if you guys have any other questions, and I will catch you all later. Peace.